Hello and welcome to the Thought Room. I'm your host, Hallie Rose. This week, our episode is for all of the music lovers out there. If you've been listening to the podcast, you may have noticed that we have a pretty sweet intro song. Well, that is thanks to Chris Child, aka Kodomo. So, a few years ago, I was making a Spotify playlist. This is a thing I like to do. I curate all sorts of different lists for different moods. I have ones for cooking, I have ones for meditating, I have ones for dancing in my kitchen in the morning. And this particular playlist I was making was called Ambient Trance Yoga. So, I wanted to make a yoga playlist, but with no lyrics. And I found this song called Concept One by Kodomo, and I was just absolutely hooked. There was something about this song that really made me feel something, and I felt both energized and calmly focused at the same time, and I just fell in love with it. So, flash forward to creating this podcast, I was trying to create or work with someone to create a song that would fit the mood of what I was putting out there. And the feedback I gave to them was, I want something that sounds kind of like this song. And I sent them Concept One. And after a while going back and forth, I thought, you know what? Why don't I just see if I can use Concept One? So I tracked Chris down on the internet and I sent him an email explaining what I was doing, and he said yes. So it's been so amazing to have the exact song that I so wanted as the theme song for the Thought Room. A little bit about Chris. He is an Emmy award-winning composer, and he has written scores for many TV shows, including the soap opera All My Children, for which he actually won an Emmy in 2014. As Kodomo, he is best known for his work on the Harmonix video games Amplitude and Frequency, which were actually precursors to the games Guitar Hero and Rock Band by the same company. You might have heard of them. Kodomo is actually the Japanese word for child, which is a nod to Chris's last name, and also the fact that he grew up in Japan. This episode was recorded in Portland, Maine from Chris's home studio. I was sitting about 1 foot from his Emmy. His studio is decorated just full to the brim of musical instruments. He had about 6 keyboards and synthesizers and amps stacked up on top of each other. It was kind of like being in a electronic machine world crossed with an elf workshop. So you should definitely check out Chris's music. It's pretty easy to find on Spotify and Bandcamp, so just search Kodomo Music. And at the end of this podcast, I'll play the entire track of Concept One because I love it so much. So without further ado, let's step into the Thought Room with Kodomo. Chris Child, welcome to the Thought Room.
Thank you.
So we are recording from your home studio here in Portland, Maine. It's this big, beautiful old house, and you've welcomed me in, and I had this great blueberry scone this morning, and your cold brew. That was really fantastic. And so you are an electronic artist. You've recently relocated to Portland from Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. And how long ago did you make that move?
So it's about a year. Like late June last year. So it's been a little over a year.
Yeah. And it's an interesting story about how I got to your front door. Well, at least I think it's interesting.
Uh-huh.
And so when I started this podcast a couple months ago, I was thinking about doing an intro, a musical intro, and what kind of music I would like to have. Now, about a year ago, I started creating this playlist on Spotify so that I could do music or do yoga to it. And this list was called ambient trance music. And somehow I came across one of your songs, which is Concept One from your album. It's Still Life, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And I just fell in love with this song, man. I heard it and I was like, this is, I don't know, this is sacred. And it every time I listened to it, it was like I was waking up. That's how I would describe it. So flash forward to starting this podcast, I said to my brother, Zach, who's been helping me out with some stuff, he's a musician as well. I said, I need something that sounds like this. And I sent him your song. And he got really busy and he was working on it a little bit. And then I just had this thought. I was like, why don't I just actually ask the artist if I can just have the exact song that I want? So I tracked you down on social media somehow, which was kind of hard to do, and got your email address. And I just said, hey, I don't even know how this works, but I love your music and it's really special to me. And I really would love to have it as an intro. And you emailed me back. And you were like, yeah, that would be awesome. And so we exchanged a couple emails and we were talking about some really cool stuff, sacred geometry and all kinds of sonic alchemy stuff. And now here I am. And it's such a pleasure to be here. So yeah, you have an incredible story. And I would love to hear more about it. And maybe I'll just let you take the reins on it. But this whole musical journey, I imagine, started a long time ago for you. And you grew up in Japan.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, in Tokyo.
In Tokyo.
Yeah.
And were you born there?
No, I moved there. It was about a year old.
Okay.
When I moved there.
And so your alias is Kodomo.
Right, which is child, my last name in Japanese.
Yeah. So child is the Japanese word. Kodomo is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Kodomo is a Japanese word for child.
Cool. I really like that. That's neat. So you want to tell me a little bit about, like, first of all, why did you end up in Japan at a year old? What's the story there?
Yeah. My dad was working for the Foreign Service, as part of the U.S. government, and so we moved around a lot. But Japan was kind of one of his areas of specialty. He grew up there as well. So we have like this 3-generation lineage. My grandfather was working there, and we lived there 3 different kind of periods of my life. So one period of really early childhood, and then sort of middle, early childhood, and then fast forward to when I was in college. They moved there a 3rd time. So I followed them.
That makes sense. Well, before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about New York City because you lived there and I currently live there, and just this magical kind of pulse that city has. And you said something about the fact that when you moved to New York, you felt like you were kind of searching for something that was reminiscent of Tokyo.
Sure. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, like, what is that energy that you were seeking, or what was your experience of Tokyo?
I think, to me, growing up in Tokyo was always really magical, in that it was all about discovery, and I think I particularly resonated with it because it was very safe, and so as a kid, and very accessible. You walked everywhere. You took the subway by yourself or with friends. You didn't really need a lot of supervision. It just worked that way. And there was always some little cool shop selling whatever cool toys or weird candy or bizarre, crazy cartoons, and there was always something. It was also very international. Kind of my world as a kid there was one of the happiest sort of periods of my childhood when I look back at it. I think I was exposed to so much there. So I think I always maybe subconsciously craved that, and I felt like when I moved to New York City, it had that expanse to it. It had those, all. It was this super large world where just this giant collage of everything from like, the arts, the business, the everything and everything in between. I think a lot of activity. Things were just like happening there. There's a lot of spontaneity and things kind of coming up that colliding, I guess, in ways that other areas just wouldn't happen due to the lack of space, people, interests, and
Totally.
it was really just like this hub of of creative energy 24/7.
Yes. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. I think that's definitely alive in New York City as well. It's like
Yeah,
you just go to a place like that
yeah,
and you can feel it. It's like blood running through veins. It's
yeah,
the creativity running
yeah,
through the city.
sure.
Yeah. Very cool. So, your musical journey, when did you first recognize that music was something more than a hobby?
Mm. I think it was probably like last year of high school where I realized I really want to pursue this and do this. That was probably I'd kind of been dabbling a little bit, um, really throughout high school and as a kid, had studied piano and always really loved it. But yeah, I felt like probably like last year of high school where I was really excited about what I was making, which I would never play for anyone at this point, except for my mom, who would probably cringe at it. But I was really, yeah, it was evident to me at that point that I wanted to pursue this and I wanted to go deeper um,
So,
and do it. Yeah.
so what did that look like? You have that recognition. This is something that's really important to me. And then what's the unfolding like for you?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's a long, winding, certainly nonlinear journey of going to Boston for college and going to music school there to study this stuff deeper. So first 4 years at Berkeley were kind of Berkeley College of Music in Boston was like my ex- really first time exposure to actually like kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of music and uh,
Music theory.
music theory and composition and electronic music production, which was really at that point um, focused on synthesis more so than now. It's a more holistic program. At that point, it was pretty small and new, but that was something I really wanted to learn was electronic music synthesis, understanding synthesizers, using synthesizers to create music, sampling, recording and manipulating sounds, and so that was like I guess you'd say like rudimentary training, and then yeah, from there I worked a little at the college doing some kind of co-teaching, and then took a job at a video game company in Boston working on music for video games at the time. We were working on these games called Amplitude and Frequency, which were kind of these precursor games to Guitar Hero and Rock Band that came after the same company.
And you were involved with all of those?
Yeah, with the original music creation, the sound design, and and then
Wow.
taking the songs from like the bigger name artists and configuring them for the game, which I consider that like that was where I really learned. It was really hands on. Like it was amazing at the time because there was really nothing like it, and I was getting to like take a song from David Bowie, get the multi-track masters, and see his secrets, how he puts his song together, like component by component, and do that to 100 other bands or whatever, and see how they do what they do.
Wow.
And then also create original music that needed to fit the context of the game. So I feel like that was where I really like I guess integrated a lot of the stuff. And then paralleling that, I was always messing around with like a constantly growing apartment studio setup, which just kept getting bigger and bigger. Wherever I could afford to, I'd be buying synths or samplers and messing around in my bedroom creating stuff, and eventually led me to New York, where I was working scoring TV shows, and I was also working with the record label, where I'd work on the TV music in the daytime, and in the evening time I'd work on my own stuff. And that record label ended up putting out the first album, Still Life, which this is like fast forward 10, 12 years later, something along the lines of that. And I felt like that was kind of an amalgamation of a lot of previous little experiments that were stored up on my hard drive, and I never felt like should be shown to the world. But at a certain point, it felt like, okay, and let's make an album, see what happens. And I had no expectations about it. It was really more like I'm doing this because I have to do this. I want to do this, and I always saw it as kind of paralleling the work that I did with scoring, for example. But I think actually, releasing something felt like it was a part of me that needed to get out and needed to happen. So it after releasing Still Life and seeing that, oh, okay, it's out there and it's actually connecting to people, it became really, and it's important for me to kind of continue that and continue to cultivate that. And that's, yeah.
Was there any resistance for you? This is something I like to ask a lot of people, especially creatives, because I feel like resistance is a thing that comes up over and over again. You'd been kind of storing a lot of things on your hard drive for sometimes up to 10 years, and
Sure.
now you're about to release, like birth this piece of yourself into the world. Like,
Yeah.
how vulnerable is that?
Yeah, it's very vulnerable. I think constantly, well, I felt in fear of getting any kind of a poor review or just being perceived as inauthentic, or like it's like a sound alike of something else. Or I think it was yeah, I mean, it is really vulnerable to put something out, and it's evident. It was evident to me that like at a certain point, you're either going to do that or you're just going to like store it on your drive, and it's not going to be known. And I think I was really motivated by a good friend of mine who was also working at the video game company. And one of the things I admired about him was he was in a band, but he was actively producing his own music, putting it out, and that was seeing the tangibility of actually like, oh, you can do this, like from A to Z. You know, you make the music, you go through the steps of actually packaging it, thinking about the larger brand of the design, and making a product. You know, and that it was inspiring to me, and it was something that I wanted to do. But again, you know, and definitely due to what you mentioned, always felt like, okay, I got to get to a point where I'm satisfied with it enough that I feel like I have something to show that feels authentic, and that feels authentic to me, and that I feel proud of to share with the world. And I think it took me a while to do that.
Yeah.
But once I did it, I couldn't stop, I think.
I feel like I read somewhere too about still life that, and perhaps this is why you chose the name, but I'm sure you'll tell me something about some photographs that you took on a trip.
Yeah, I mean, there was multiple trips. I mean, the idea behind still life was so one of the impetus for me to work on an album was I always liked the idea of working with concepts, or doing some kind of creating something around an idea. And this is why scoring has always appealed to me, because it's someone else's story. But with an album, I liked the idea of to have a central idea and to base the music around. And I'd been always like I loved photography. I was always a hobbyist. I call it a hobbyist photographer because I don't really technically know very much about photography. But I had this idea to kind of take from a lot of traveling, which I was able to do at the time, some of these photos, and kind of use them as like springboards to basically see what musical ideas, what comes up when I put this photo in front of me. And it was really for me about like what space, what ideas I get from the physical spaces, or the mood of the spaces, the lighting of the spaces, and using that as just like a starting point.
So was each track was sort of inspired by one particular photo?
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. So if the original CD comes with a booklet of all the photos, and each track has a specific photo attached to it. Actually, I think on Bandcamp you have all the photos as well.
I love this. This is a highly conceptual sort of thing here, and it's just so magical to think about you looking at something, light or nature or these spaces, and hearing the music in it. Mm-hmm. Like I really think that's kind of what inspiration is looking around the world and seeing the beauty, or seeing the music, seeing the vibration in everything that's around us. I'm wondering, what are some of the photos in particular that, like, maybe this track was written about a photo of such and such? Like,
sure, yeah. There's really, I'd say, like loose inspiration. It was, honestly, part of it was a way to get through creative blocks. It's really hard to start something. So, for me, it was a picture of an airplane, for example, that started Concept 16, and it was just looking up at this airplane flying over in the sky over, I think, somewhere in Park Slope. I do remember that, actually. and just this kind of running synth hook that sort of somehow for me captured this momentum of, it's a very, I don't think it's a great photo or anything. It's just, it's an airplane in the sky, but it was a particular time of day. It was maybe something for me that you know, it captured something that gave rise to this kind of synth repeating melody, which, you know, later became evolved into a full track.
And first of all, that's such a cool story. I love this whole concept, but I'm dying to know about concept one and,
Okay, yeah.
what the photo is for that.
Yeah, concept one, the photo was, I was skiing, and it was I think it was New Mexico. Yeah, I was with my, visiting my brother who lived there at the time. And we were at the top of one of the slopes, and it was just these like snow covered trees, basically. And there's just like a little moment of stillness, I guess, that I felt was reflected in that. And then that's what popped up.
It's such a majestic song. It is kind of like one of those snapshot tableau moments. When I listen to that song, I'm like, this encompasses something that's hard to articulate. Yeah. Very cool.
Thank you.
So I noticed too, when I was going through the different names of your albums and singles, that you have, for example, Frozen in Motion, Patterns in Light. You have a lot of references to geometry and light and physics and nature. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about why that keeps popping up for you in your music and why you've integrated that.
Yeah, I mean, those have all been inspirations to me. I mean, stuff that I just enjoy. I really enjoy reading about contemporary areas in physics. I find that stuff super inspiring. And certainly nature, being in nature, aspects of nature are inspirational to me. And yeah, I don't, to me, they're not like, I guess they're more like just loosely referred to. I mean, I certainly see connections between patterns and in patterns, say patterns in nature, in ideas in contemporary physics that actually parallel, I think, some of the compositional ideas in music. I mean, I found if I try to employ them too literally, it's pretty boring and doesn't really work. But I think there's some kind of, when they're applied in I guess a more integrated way, where there's a natural logic to it that's that kind of area of music's always been interesting to me. The music that I listen to and I really like, certainly that's an area of focus. The music, classical music, classical composers, contemporary composers, where the focus really is on patterns, permutations of patterns, and I guess that area of music has always been really, I felt really inspired and connected to.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching this documentary last night on YouTube. I think it was called Sonic Geometry. And I always knew that music and mathematics were obviously connected, but I'd never really dove in to exploring these depths before and having somebody lay it out for me in the way that this documentary was doing with looking at the different shapes. So, the circle and the triangle, and talking about how you add up the the angles in these different shapes, and it's 180 degrees in a triangle and 360 in a circle, and how these correspond to different frequencies and harmonics. I was just blown away to see it laid out by that, or like that rather. And I didn't know how much of that has been an interest for you, and have you read up on stuff like that, and like the 432 hertz thing that just keeps
with the tuning,
yeah
right, where that's like a natural,
yeah
a little of it. I'm not super like deeply familiar with it. I mean, it's interesting to me that it both occurs, that the level of, you could say, mathematics and structure occurs on both the sound level itself and in the composition process of actually structuring a piece of music. And I've been more interested and more familiar with the latter, in the actual compositional process, the compositional art of organizing ideas and patterns, and that's definitely very numbers oriented. And but yeah, I've certainly heard about it's fascinating to me that there's actual like healing properties of particular frequencies and whatnot. But I wouldn't, I'm certainly not like say I'm super familiar with it.
It's true, everyone's getting into like the binaural beats.
Oh right. Yeah.
There's binaural beats on Spotify. Even you can
oh really
there's
wow.
Oh yeah, there's lists for, and then you scroll down, it's like binaural beats for lucid dreaming, and for napping, or for meditation, or for energizing, and there's all these different frequencies that correspond for those different states of consciousness.
Interesting. Well, I did use a binaural effect on the melody for Concept One.
You did?
Yeah. So it's something in software they have processing plugins where you can actually take a sound and simulate a binaural experience.
So for those who don't even know what binaural means, I mean, can you talk about what that filter does?
Yeah, it's essentially it creates the illusion of movement in a 360 degree space. So you could actually simulate what a sound would sound like moving around your head, or and it really is only effective if you're wearing headphones, and then that's when you really hear the effect of it. It can be really jarring and weird and disorienting, or it can be really cool. Sort of depends, but it's always, I mean, definitely with as an electronic musical tool, it's fantastic, because it's again, so much of the process is finding interesting ways of manipulating sounds and doing cool things with sound, and it can be a fun tool.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I'm thinking of another song that I love, and I'll have to play it for you before I go, but I think it's called Bubbles. And I don't know who the artist is. They actually could be a Japanese artist, but what they've done is create this binaural soundscape of all these different balls so it's like ping pong ball, and then basketballs, and like rubber balls, and they just, you feel like you're in a room full of bouncing balls, all different types of balls, and it's just this wild sort of experience, because it's realistically not something that most of us will ever physically experience, being in a room full of all different types of bouncing balls. But so cool that sound can do that, give us
Totally.
these
Yeah.
beautiful experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just I came to your music, like I said, through yoga, because I was looking for something to help facilitate me getting into a certain state. And I think that that's the power of music. People can create playlists for cooking or making love or yoga or meditation, because that's what music does. It kind of alters our states. And I didn't know if, is that something you're, even in your own listening to music throughout your day, other artists that you're inspired by that you like listening to, is that something that you're into, kind of curating your states, using music as a tool in that way?
Not totally. I mean, I think I have music on, like, in a lot of contexts, and I have to be wary of it because sometimes it annoys other people. So I will have like different music when I'm cooking, per se, or when I'm driving. I mean, I think listening in the car is always great.
What's your car music?
Car music. I mean, well, I'll go through phases, but it's currently I have to listen to something new. So it has to be something I haven't heard before, because I find myself getting in a rut of not listening to any new music, which is really not good, because I'm not. I don't want to get stuck in one period and just, there's a lot of great stuff out there. So cars, whatever's current, which I guess today was Apparat, which is fantastic record. I think LP5, yeah. Um, but yeah, I guess for I think I think about music almost just like it's like an appetite for, um, what can I grab from it that I can use in creating my own music.
Mm.
And so I'm constantly trying to listen to stuff that's new, old, or discover something that's new, that I find something in there that, uh, I want to try and do, or I want to try and integrate into what I do. Um,
I was thinking about this idea of integrating and getting inspired when you were speaking about the video games.
yeah,
And that idea of looking at David Bowie's master track for something is just
right.
kind of hilarious to me. It's like kind of seeing a map into their brain
Yeah.
in a way. It's a very intimate
Mm-hmm.
thing to see how somebody is layered what they're doing. And you not only got to see a few of those, you got to see like 100 or more
Yeah.
of these little mind maps for these various artists, and then create your own. I mean, what if you had to come forward with a couple of takeaways or things that you look back and go, wow, you know what? I really think that leaked into my music.
Mm-hmm.
Could you pinpoint any things that were takeaways for you from that whole experience?
Definitely. I think what, I would say, like, the biggest thing that I took away from that was, um, a better understanding of musical structure, of song structure, of whatever you want to call it, um, the architecture of actually constructing a piece from beginning, middle, and end, and seeing how, um, you could say the nugget of the idea relates to the whole, and how it's, conveyed in a way that's interesting and surprising, or surprising and predictable display between the two,
Mm.
and the artists or composers who are really, good at doing that are amazing. And it's like if you want to if you study what they're doing, they're it's clearly like there's a lineage behind it, but there's also a breaking of that and trying something else out and seeing how the two relate. And so that to me was a big component of it, because I felt like up until that point I certainly come up with ideas, and but I felt like structuring a piece on a larger scale, actually creating something that felt satisfying, that felt that to me that balance between familiarity and surprise, I think took away some ideas of how to not saying I can do that per se, but how to approach that. It's kind of like studying different, like it's like different molds. Like you can see, oh, okay, here's the diagram. Here's what that's how they got that effect, or that's they made that choice there, which leaves you really satisfied. And there's usually some reasons behind that.
I love this. I can't help but think of, it's almost like refining your musical palette. And I keep thinking of recipes and this recognition of, you were talking about the lineage. So this is like the recipe card. It's like, well, here's how they did it. But the best chefs are the ones who sprinkle their own little, it's like, what was that surprising little spice from the garden?
Totally. And I love this because I see so many relationships between food and music. And I they're completely aligned.
What ways do you find they're aligned in? I mean, I completely agree, but
yeah, I mean, I love to cook. I think certainly you could say in the balance, presentation, care, choice of ingredients, relationship between them. Again, element of something that's familiar and something that's not familiar, that work and that actually work together. That sense of something new. What I like to call musical hooks that sort of, or earworms that get in your head. That kind of like you taste something that's like really good, you kind of can't stop eating it. it's so you're sort of it sort of takes over your whole hijacks the rest of your sense perceptions, or has that effect. But I think that the process of actually, to me, like picking out ingredients, trying combinations of things to see how they balance out one another. That the actual process of making, of cooking something is in that way really similar to how I approach making music, which is kind of throwing stuff in a pot and seeing what works. Yeah.
Cool. So we're sitting here in your studio, and I'm sitting like 1 foot away from your Emmy, which is kind of funny. And we were joking about it before, but in all reality, this is really a huge accolade, a really big thing. And you got this for your work scoring television shows. That's correct?
Yes.
And what year was this again?
That was 2014.
And what show were you working on?
So it was a soap opera, which was All My Children. So I was composing music for a few soap operas at the time, which was the bread and butter for a lot of my work throughout in TV.
So this process is really fascinating to me, the idea of scoring something, because I would love for you to talk about it, just to kind of walk me through what that is like or was like to sit down and do, because in my mind I'm envisioning watching a clip of something and trying to capture the emotion that's going on in a scene. And then again, going back to this cooking recipe, it's like this cooking up, or this alchemy of trying to nail it. Like we were talking about outside before when we were eating the scones at the picnic table, and
Right.
I was saying it's like when you when you tweak things and then you get it with the music and you see it. So I mean, what's that? Can you tell me about what that was like
In the context of scoring.
in the context of scoring something? Because
Yeah.
it's a different type of creation.
Yeah. Yeah. Very different. So with scoring, it's really minimal. At least, for what I was doing. Certainly not doing these big orchestral uh, arrangements or anything. So it was really about finding the right what was the seed. It's quite minimal. Like it could, and so a lot of the process would be spent just trying to find that one little idea, or often it would be a sound, without really embellishing it very much. That would kind of lay the foundation, and I can say a tonal mood of um, of whatever it was that I was scoring.
So were these like scenes? These were scenes.
Yeah,
Can you
scenes.
give an example of like type of a scene that you would be scoring for, and what does it look like to find that sound? Are you talking about a particular instrument sound that you would choose?
Sometimes it would be a particular instrument, but often it would be something a little more unusual. So it would be an instrument that had either been manipulated, or something that would really give rise to kind of a feeling, or a mood, something that would maybe be like hard to identify, but was that just made sense in the context of what was happening. So yeah, there's a lot of sound design was a big component of it, of just trying. Again, a very minimal approach. It could just be a droney kind of texture that then would kind of be the defining thing that everything would be based around. So there's never like really a lot of stuff going on. It was more kind of honing in on trying to find that one component that could say that could tell the story, that could help really, I guess, help move the story. It was about moving the what was going on the screen.
Which is a hard thing to do well, I think, because a lot of music is really meant to be the focal point.
Right.
And in this, you're trying to elevate something else by
Right.
being pretty minimalist.
Right.
And making very conscious choices in order to be able to do that.
Right.
It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Sometimes it was easy, and that was like a celebration, and then other times it was really frustratingly difficult, and it's also it's not a personal choice all the time. Most of the time, it wasn't a personal choice. It was always a collaboration between whoever I was working with, who was either directing it or producing it, and definitely varied depending on what it was. If it was a documentary, or if it was a show or a soap, was a completely different. And it all needs to be. It's all needs to be cleared by the guys who were in charge of editing it and putting it together. So a lot of those choices were dictated on feedback, through what they were looking for and what they wanted, and sometimes I had a lot more freedom to do what I wanted, and other times it was more dictated.
So when you found out you were nominated for this Emmy, you had been nominated a couple
Sure.
times
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have a feeling this was going to be the time?
I did, and then I didn't want to jinx it because I thought, oh, you know what, it's going to be like this the same as before. And at a certain point, I just uh, gave up expectations of having even what it meant. It wasn't like, yeah, it's on a certain level. It was like, okay, it's cool, it looks good, and it'll probably help my career at large. But um, I also recognize that it's it's way out of my control, and it's it. But I also like secretly wanted it. Like yeah, it'd be cool. It'd be cool to have that recognition, or at least to like have a mark of achievement, even though it's like I said in the context of the industry, it's really it could be anyone, and it's not. It's really out of the realm of control, I think.
So I'm just picturing this moment because not many people, like I said, will have that moment. And so you're sitting in the seat and you're waiting there, and everybody's all dressed up like they are for the Emmys. And then there's that moment,
Right.
and the tension's building, and they're reading the results. What's that feeling like in that 1 second after they announce that you've just won an Emmy?
I think it was a little bit of shock. Yeah. Disbelief in, wait, really? And oh, cool. That's, yeah, it felt good.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. So, you've really mixed it up. You've done the scoring, you've done the video game stuff, you've done your solo stuff. Didn't you released a piano album?
Yep.
Was it this year?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So in last year around this time, I launched a record label with a partner, good friend of mine, called Foil Imprints, and the idea behind the label was kind of to create a hub for a larger context to host the music that I want to put out as not just as Kodomo, but as other entities that focus on specific you can say areas of music, like ambient music. Piano music was one of those, as well as host collaborations that I was working on with other artists and friends, and release their music who I felt was great and needed a platform to be released, and kind of build it up over time. So the piano record was an idea that this would be kind of the more for lack of a better word, neoclassical ambient area, and it would be a series of releases over time, where I would have maybe a collection of 10 to 12 piano pieces. And I'd worked a lot on the Kodomo stuff up to that point, I think 4 records for LPs. And while, like, first and foremost, I love the studio. I love the process of being in the studio and just having that kind of playground assortment of stuff to try. I was getting back into playing piano and practicing piano, and playing music by composers I loved, and felt that it would be a great exercise for me to kind of just work on one instrument, on creating a piece of music without all the wizardry and gadgetry of the studio, and just see if I could do it, and kind of sharpen my compositional skills a little bit by by really fully exploring that. And so, and I also found it really gratifying to work faster because the studio process is so slow. It's really a lot of trying things and over time kind of amassing something that eventually becomes something else. Whereas sitting down at the piano and working on a piece of music was a lot more immediate, and that was really satisfying. And also to kind of just get me to be more immediate, to cultivate that. So yeah, that was the idea, and uh, it was important to me that these pieces were simple to start with. I purposely wanted to do almost like treat them as like etudes, basically study pieces, and with the idea that these would be over time. I would further add to this catalog, so to speak, and they would be lightly coated with synths and ambiances, or maybe interesting processing, but very minimally. Like piano focus was really important, and a few of them were definitely modeled around pieces from Bach and Debussy that I really like noticed while practicing these pieces. Maybe just practicing one passage and playing it over and over. That the process of doing that gave rise to like, oh, I could take this little nugget of an idea or a transition and actually kind of create something along, using that as kind of a springboard to compose a piece.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's so cool how inspiration can come in so many ways. And you mentioned Bach. Do you have some other favorite inspiring artists? I guess muses.
So many. I mean, I kind of would
Yeah, just a
categorize.
handful, maybe for
Yeah,
people
yeah.
who are listening, who dig your music and are
Okay,
like, I want to know, I want to
sure.
dive deeper into these layers.
Yeah, I mean, for the classical lineage, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Schubert, really their piano music, particularly. I mean, really like the expanse of their music, I find incredibly inspiring. Philip Glass, current composer, who I would major influence on how I think about music and the process of composing music. Um, Steve Reich, Terry Riley, the American minimalist composers, Avo Part, and then certainly the classic electronic lineage music, Depeche Mode, Kraftwerk, New Order, a lot of the industrial music, which was kind of my high school listening. Bands like Skinny Puppy and certainly Nine Inch Nails, which to me is always, that was like a major impetus for me, like getting into creating my own music. And then the Warp era '90s music, I would say, was probably like the most related to the kind of musical area that I was interested in moving towards. So, bands like the artists Aphex Twin, Plaid, Words of Canada, those Autechre, the kind of golden era '90s warp artists, Orbital, Underworld, all those artists are on my favorite playlists. Repeat a lot. Still, I think really relevant.
Yeah. I think that's probably how Spotify helped me find you, was like some combination of I like Brian Eno, but then
Yeah,
there's
Brian Eno's one, sure. Yeah,
Aphex Twin,
yeah,
so they were
yeah,
like,
yeah.
you'll probably dig this guy. So,
Awesome.
yeah. Um, so we were talking a little bit before we started this recording about, you're into meditation as well. And I was wondering what keeps you in your best creating space? Like, do you have your little nuanced thing? You maybe drink your cold brew. Like, what's your kind of like secret ritual for yourself that just gives you a higher chance at feeling successful in any given day?
Yeah, I try to start each morning routine with having a pretty substantial breakfast. Cold brew is an integral and absolutely necessary part of that.
What's your favorite breakfast?
Omelet probably with side of like big thick toast, some
Nice.
really nice jam,
Mm.
and like really good omelet, some nice cheese or something in there, and cold brew coffee,
Homemade.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, fancy organic cream.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, and then I have to eat something substantial before I start, and then um I'll usually do about a 10-minute meditation session in the studio, and then yeah, that's kind of my simple start routine,
Mm-hmm.
to just have a little clean slate
Mm.
before I go into it.
Nice. So with all of this, I mean, it's clearly something you're very good at, but people are good at a lot of things, and that doesn't necessarily mean we're inspired to keep doing it. My question is, what makes you keep doing this? Like, why do you even think this is important?
Right, that's a great question. I actively think about that because on some level I don't really even know. I mean, I can't really think of doing anything else on a certain level. But there are there are aspects that are evident, like it's it's just thrilling. I think it's like that's one aspect of it. It's thrilling to go into the studio, and I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm going to mess around with some gadget, and see what comes out, and that kind of sense of discovery, um, and the satisfaction that comes from that discovery is really motivating, and I think hooks me in that sense. And there are other aspects that, like, there's definitely the desire to improve, to get better, by doing it, by practicing it more. I love gear. I love messing around with
You've got a
gear.
lot of gear in
Yeah, it's
here.
kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's
How many different keyboards are one, two,
too
three,
many.
4, 5, 6? Wow.
Yeah, it's something.
What's
Yeah,
your
it's something
favorite
about.
piece of equipment in this room?
I do. I'd say the Mini Moog Voyager and the ARP 2600.
Nice. Wow, they look very complex. There's like 40 knobs on that over
it,
there.
it's actually not. It's funny. Once you know what the basic functions are, it's the same on any of them.
Mm.
And
Yeah. Wow. So what are you working on currently? I guess that's the first part of the question. And then um, if you'd love to tell people how they can find more of your music and find you online to support your music, that would be awesome.
thanks. Well, I'm currently working on a new Kodomo record, starting the early stages of it, which really is, for me, is kind of trying to find the sound of it, and trying things, but I hope to really jump into it in the fall and work
Do you have
through.
a name for that yet, or
No,
a concept for it? It's just early
I
stages.
have an idea of what I want it to sound like, or I have an idea of like the sonic interest.
The
Of it.
ethos.
But yeah, is that what it's called?
Ethos.
Okay,
Yeah.
ethos. Okay,
If
yeah.
you had to
Yeah.
pick like an adjective or two to kind of sum up what you're trying to capture in this. I mean, you don't have to tell us a lot if you want to keep it private, but just to give a sense of like, this is what I'm feeling for this next album.
Yeah, I think it would be a more mellow space, but with a little bit of an undercurrent of a bite to it, an undercurrent of anxiety, I guess.
Sounds like the human
Yeah,
experience.
yeah. And I think, yeah, each album has been pretty different in certain ways. In certain ways, I've kind of gone back to this. I like the kind of pace of it would match maybe more the pace of Still Life, the first one, but definitely rooted a lot in a lot of kind of the experiments that I've done in the studio with the weird modular equipment.
Cool.
Yeah.
So online.
Yeah. So online, Bandcamp is probably the most familiar to everyone. I do have a website, but I don't think anyone knows it anymore. It's kodomomusic.com. Yes, I get some traffic there, but it's all pretty much shifted to Bandcamp, which is kodomo.bandcamp.com, kodomo.bandcamp.com, or kodomomusic.com. Everything's available there, as well as on the label site that we run, which is Foil Imprints. .bandcamp.com, and you can find the catalog of stuff there.
Amazing. Chris Child, thank you so much
Thank you, Hallie,
for inviting me to your studio and for being on the Thought Room today. I'm so psyched to have your music as a part of our podcast, and really looking forward to seeing what comes out for you with the music, and we'll definitely be supporting you the whole way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.